Hello, welcome to our community Bible study. We come to you from the First Christian Church of Fort Thomas, Kentucky. I'm Larry Smith. I'm the interim pastor of the church. In our last lesson, we studied the nature and creation of the Megillot, the collection of books sometimes referred to as the five festal scrolls, as they are called in Judaism. Following the order of the scrolls or the writings found in the Jewish Study Bible, which places the writings in their liturgical order, we begin today with the work that has various names. It's called the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, the Cantos, and the Seir HaShirah. The opening words, the Song of Songs, represents the Hebrew form of the superlative. You may remember from the Messiah, Lord of Lords and King of Kings. This is the same formulation in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew language, the adjectives do not have comparative or superlative forms. In English, we have the adjective good, the comparative better, and the superlative best. In Hebrew, the superlative is written Song of Songs, Lord of Lords, King of Kings. So perhaps the best meaning translation of the title would be the greatest song or the best song. Who wrote this book? Well, there's some significant division of opinion as to who wrote this book. Some argue that it was Solomon, and this is the traditional argument from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Solomon wrote this book when he was young and expresses a young man's desire for love. Solomon, likewise, according to the tradition, wrote the book of Proverbs when he was a middle-aged man and needed to get along in life. And the book of Ecclesiastes, which we'll be looking at later, when he was an older, cynical man. The author is identified or is identifiable as a king in several passages, and there are signs of luxury throughout the book. Moreover, the vocabulary has some similarities with the book of Ecclesiastes. But there are strong arguments against Solomon as the author. The most explicit verse identifying Solomon as the author is relatively late, many scholars think. It was added on, if you will, at a later date. There's the influence of other languages that impacted the Hebrew language at a much later time than Solomon lived. That is, the impact of Aramaic and Persian and Greek languages and expressions and some ideas that have crept into the book somehow or other. Also, if Solomon wrote the book, why does the woman in the book speak first and seemingly most of the time? Then you have the whole issue of the genre here. This is clearly a love song or love songs in the plural. Solomon's love life must have been much too complex for the faithfulness of the lovers in this book. I mean, after all, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Lord knows how many honeydew lists he had, and have time to rule the country and write love poetry, maybe asking too much of him. The date of the writing depends on who you see as the author. If it's Solomon, it would have to be in the 10th century, mid-10th century when Solomon lived. If it was a later author, you have more flexibility of time, and it might be as late as the 3rd century BCE. The nature of the work is very clearly love poetry. There are some differences of opinion, as we'll see, whether it's one love poem or many love poems, but it is certainly love poetry. In the Hebrew, it's more sexually explicit than in the English. Some of the words used in Hebrew have double meanings, and these don't translate well into English. There are two major speakers and then sort of a chorus, if you will. You have the woman or the bride, the female part, and then you have the boyfriend or the bridegroom, the male part. And these have the majority of the speaking parts, and all of the Song of Songs, the best song, basically speaking parts. In a few places you have companions. They're generally described as her companions. Sometimes they're described as the chorus, sometimes as the daughters of Jerusalem. And they have a few parts, speaking parts, inserted into the text. The text itself has no narrative development. It's impossible to see how the story progressed. It's just the longings and the pinings of one lover for another, with a few side comments thrown in. The author used many literary techniques, puns, sound plays, very popular in Hebrew poetry, similes and metaphors and other literary devices to make the argument, to present the argument. The text of the writing is somewhat complex. Our oldest text of the book come from the Dead Sea Scrolls, where 4 copies of the greatest song were found. Two of these manuscripts have omitted rather large but different sections of material, perhaps indicating that the material was too explicit for the scribes to copy out. Now, we don't know, but the text then varies in the Hebrew. 5 methods of interpretation have been used to interpret this work. So what you get depends in some extent on how you interpret the work. The first and probably the longest, most traditional and most popular way is the allegorical way. When admitted into the canon, it was probably allowed into the Bible because it was interpreted allegorically. In the allegorical interpretation, you have God as represented by the male lover. The female lover is representative of either the Israelites or later the Jewish people, and in the Christian tradition as the church or Christians. And the idea of the faithfulness of lovers is the allegorical interpretation that allowed it into the Hebrew canon, according to most scholars. The work is thoroughly secular in its given text. Some would say it's erotic, and 1 or 2 have gone to the extreme and called it pornographic. But there's no mention of God or religious ideas or practices. There's one reference to a wedding, but it's not clear whether that was in someone's dream or in reality. During the medieval period, this Song of Songs, the best song, was the most popular Old Testament book in the Christian world, particularly in the monasteries. One of the leading monks of the time, Bernard of Clairvaux, preached 86 sermons from the book and never finished it. All of those use the allegorical interpretation. But this allegorical interpretation is not as popular in the everyday life of the church as it was in the medieval period, and Christian preachers seldom preach from this book to their congregations. A second method of interpretation, to see it as a cult myth, that is, a story that explains a cultic behavior. And in this interpretation, the book begins as a liturgy or a myth or a story which accompanies the cult, the cultural ritual action dealing with a fertility cult. The text was changed and adapted, this argument goes, for an Israelite audience. This interpretation received some popularity in the 19th century when scholars were finding many ancient texts and depictions of fertility cults in action in the Near East. This interpretation is not widely advocated today. More widely used today is the concept that the song is a dialogue, a play, a drama that has no speakers identified and no staging explained. It's just the writing, the words of a drama with no way of indicating who spoke this part and what was happening on stage when this part was being delivered. You see this dramatic interpretation to some extent in some of the modern translations like the New English Bible or the New International Version, where inserted into the text they have speakers identified. When you compare several of these, you'll find that oftentimes the translations have the same person speaking, but in others, the translators have put in a different author, a different speaker for a particular section. So identifying who's speaking in the best song is sometimes very difficult. A fourth way of understanding the best song is that it's a single love poem. It goes through the text just as you see it. You know, this is particularly popular because there's no agreement, if you break down the poem into parts, where one part ends and one part begins. Nor is there any agreement on how many poems there are. So the argument is that it must all be one single poem. A fifth understanding is it's an anthology of love poems. That is, a bunch of love poems written at different times, perhaps in different places, under different circumstances, and have just been run together. These are the five traditional ways of understanding the song. Anthology, occult myth, drama, a single love poem, or an anthology of love poems. In my study of the best song, I've come to conclude that it's pillow talk. That is, talk between two lovers as they dream about the future, two young lovers talking and dreaming, two young, poor, hardworking people imagining a better life. You know, he's a shepherd. She also, and she complains about being in the sun too much and ruining her beauty. These are two young, hardworking kids who are madly in love with each other and dreaming of a life that could be better together. It's two young people who both enjoy the emotional and physical nature of love. Yet while they are young themselves, the text warns about awakening love too soon. It will overwhelm you if you get into love too soon. So there's this warning about falling in love too soon. Are they married, or are they dreaming about being married? The text isn't really clear here. Yes, in 3:11 it talks about he is crowned by his mother on his wedding day, not their wedding day. And so is this, just his day, or does she get some part in this wedding? Those who argue that they aren't wedded point to 5:2 and following, where he comes to the house and she won't let him in. If they're so madly in love and so passionate and wanting to be together so much, and they're married, why doesn't she let him in, get up and let him in? No, she wouldn't do that. So maybe it's because she's still living at home. They're not married. In 6:1, the chorus will ask her, where has this love of yours gone, fair one? He's gone off. He's AWOL. He can't be located. And so maybe he's not wedded to her after all. So it's an open question, I think, whether or not this couple is married. Some see the purpose in chapter 8, beginning with verse 6. It says, she's speaking, hang your locket around your neck. Hang my locket around your neck. Wear my ring on your finger. Love is invincible, facing danger and death. Passion laughs at the terrors of hell. The fire of love stops at nothing. It sweeps everything before it. Floodwaters can't drown love. Torrents of rain can't pull it down. Love can't be bought. Love can't be sold. It is not to be found in the marketplace. These thoughts on love certainly fit the words and the deeds of the book. But it is really difficult to pin down the purpose of the book itself. Used as allegory, the book became used at Passover. Passover celebrates God's love for the people and the liberation from the Israelites from the bondage of Egyptian slavery. God's love for the people. Interpreted allegorically, that is what the Song of Songs is about. One of my teachers recommended reading the best song with someone you love, and I'm passing that recommendation on to you. I would give you an outline, but I can't. It's basically impossible to create a meaningful outline, but you can enjoy the read, especially if you read it with someone you love. Please join us next time for our study of the book of Ruth. Until then, thank you and God bless you.